My name is Nicole May and I'm a nurse midwife. Currently, I am semi-retired from a practice with a birth center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Cambridge Birth Center. And I still do some per diem work there, but my main focus at the moment is in Guatemala, where I work with a group of Maya traditional midwives. Well, in a roundabout way, I initially wanted to be a veterinarian because I was crazy about horses. And I just didn't know very much, so I went to Ohio State and I did really well and met all the requirements in my first year. And I went to make the appointment with the dean of the veterinary school, and he just said, "We don't take girls." So at that time, you could do that. You could just say, it doesn't matter whether you're qualified or not. And he gave me a list of reasons why it was too hard, dirty work for a woman, and I would be taking income away from a man who needed to support a family, etc. And called me a little lady, and I was probably going to get married anyway, and why waste the money on educating me? And left me in shock. And at the time, there was no women's movement, and most people I told that story said, "Well, you see his point, don't you?" I went, "No." So I had to regroup and think about what to do. I looked into medical school, and it was the same situation there. So what was left to me was nursing, and my plan was to do the nursing and get the basis and as much medical background as I could get, work as a nurse to come up with money to be able to afford to go someplace that maybe let girls be veterinarians. But by the time I finished my nursing program, I loved nursing and continued. So I started out as a nurse and as a pediatric nurse. And I went into academia. I was an assistant professor at Ohio State University in the School of Nursing there. But a series of things sort of disillusioned me about academia. And if I were to try to distill what the problem was, it was that my voice didn't ever seem to be heard. And not just my voice, but the voices of nurses and women in general, and that we could have very little impact on all the forces that were sort of defining our profession as nurses and our status as women. There were a series of difficulties in my personal life, a divorce crisis on several levels. And I went to the Frontier Nursing Service, and I think I went there for the same reason that many people did, looking for autonomy, looking for the ability to learn my work and to be allowed to do it. That's what I was looking for. And a little romanticism about horseback, because I was a big horse lover. And at that time, of course, they were not using horses. This was in 1969. So they let me think, though, that they were, because they needed someone with my credentials to teach the pediatric portion of the very first family nurse practitioner class. So they let me believe that I'd be working on horseback until I got there, and then Miss Brown broke the news to me, and she said, "We really needed you." So she said, "But if you want to go out and do some of your work on horseback in the district, you can, because we do have horses still at Wendover." And so I was able to do that. Miss Leaf dug out some old uniforms. And so I did part of my work there still on horseback. I could talk to you for hours about the Frontier Nursing Service and what it meant and all of the incredible experiences I had there. But when I was going out on horseback, the first thing I saw was people, the older people, would come and see me coming to their cabin and weep. And then they would tell me these heartfelt stories about the impact that various midwives had on them, and what a midwife meant to them, and what the FNS midwives had meant to the people in that area. There were so many lessons learned there about involvement with the community and having the luxury of time to do the very best job you could do. You didn't have many opportunities there were no movie theaters or restaurants, and your time was spent with local people, singing, playing music, telling stories. So you had a relationship with them beyond your professional relationship, which I think has been something that I have always sought since I left FNS. The importance of listening, the importance of cultural differences, the importance of taking time. And the obstacle that I've really opposed all along is the tendencies that so many other things have to take time away from midwives, so that we're supposed to be with women, and there's so many forces that are trying to pull us away and divert us into other activities, so that we lose that connection, that personal connection, and the time that it takes to really, really do the best job in terms of prevention, in terms of birth outcomes, all of that. It's based on personal relationship, and was one very important lesson I learned there at FNS. Yes, and you know, they found the old uniform, and it was not that much more time consuming than the Jeep, and there were places that we had to go where you would be leaving a wake of mud, and then you'd have to go in the creek and back over a waterfall, and I thought, you know, I feel a little safer on the horse than I do in these maneuvers. Riding through the mountains and having the glorious mountains and stopping at every cabin, and then people would feed you, you would hear all the gossip going on in that hollow, and you'd take care of everybody in the family, the grandpa, the kids, you'd check the outhouse as to whether it was flight height, etc. And then you had this time in nature. And that's another theme I see in midwifery. It matters where women give birth, and it matters where people work and their environment and their access to air and light and nature and beautiful colors, and that it makes a difference in people's health, and it makes a difference in your ability to do your work because it's nourishing you. So it's something that I think I was able to express later on in founding the Cambridge Birth Center, where we went to great lengths to make it a place where women could get outside and touch nature, where it would be beautiful and not only safe but beautiful and reassuring and inspiring. When I left FNS reluctantly, and because I'd been there 5 years and my husband was not a coal miner or a medical professional, so there was really no work for him there. So we went to Boston, where we had friends. I think each experience in my midwifery career is that this is the highlight, this is the pinnacle, and then the next one is even better, and then the next one is even better. And what happened when I went there is I got a job in a community health center. And I wasn't qualified for the job. They needed a Spanish speaker, and they wanted someone to start a program, and midwifery was still illegal in Massachusetts. I went to the interview just, to see what might be possible in the future, and they said, "Oh, we really want you, but we need someone who speaks Spanish. And we have 2 other applicants who do speak Spanish, so if you're able to go and learn Spanish, come back in a year or so, and we would be so happy to have you join us." So, fair enough. But then 10 days later, I got the call, and the other people had declined the job. So they said, "Are you game? We'll help you get started." So I took a 6-week language course in one of the local language schools, and then I got thrown in to the clinic. But I felt confident because I'm pretty good at languages, and within a month I was pretty functional in Spanish. But again, it was this opportunity to just build something from the beginning with gifted administrators, nursing and the administrator of this clinic, 100% for the community, 100% for the staff, just saying, just do it. You're qualified, you can do this, how can we help you? Pretend it's heaven on earth and design something. And make a plan, because we have this legal obstacle for the interpartum piece of it. So that's what we did. Just dove in, wrote a grant, started a service, and began by doing prenatal, postpartum, well-woman family planning work. And then I hired 2 people who were going to be very important midwives who I hope you get a chance to interview because they are treasures, Joan Richards and Fran Ventry. We developed a strategy of well, we're going to be working with all the people who were fighting to get the law changed, but our piece of it is going to be to sort of enter the belly of the beast, to get into one of the Boston teaching hospitals. And the way we will do this is to offer our free services as labor support. And as it was at that time, translators, because there were no interpreter services. So Spanish-speaking women were really abandoned without a way to communicate when they were in labor. So we started accompanying our women in labor to do labor support. But our goal was to forge alliances with nurses and with willing doctors so that once the law changed, which we felt certain was going to happen at some point, that there would be a place to go with it. So that was really interesting to do that and to have the support of the administration of the place that you work to just do the job right. And then the law changed, and we were the first midwives, into the Brigham and Women's Hospital. And let me tell you, it was like armed warfare in the corridors because the doctors were very upset. And my first day there, one of the obstetricians walked up and said, "We're going to get you." I wandered into a junior high school, but that was kind of what was coming at you. And at every midwife in Massachusetts at that time, there was a real effort to try to, find fault with anything that you did and to get rid of this menace, as they saw it, this threat to their way of doing things. But, I think over the course of time, these alliances were the things that saved us and that allowed us to build and gradually, I think, make enormous changes in how care was given within the hospital. At that point, my friend Joan went with Fran to do home births initially, and then to found the North Shore Birth Center in Beverly, Mass., the first birth center in Massachusetts. And they did, heroic work in doing that and in making that happen. So it was a really heady time to be a midwife in Massachusetts because the women's movement was just starting, and we won our legislative battles and getting into the hospitals, getting into the community health centers, and making a place for midwifery in Massachusetts again. I think the interesting thing there was from the beginning we allied ourselves with the home birth midwives because we felt that that was an option that should be available and that there should be a continuum. And right up until we were recently stopped at Cambridge by the risk managers, the home birth midwives would send their charts of all their patients, and we would help them get the lab tests and other things they needed during the pregnancy. But if they needed to transfer, there would be a record, and they could come in and be with their clients. We didn't have to do any of these crazy pretending like they didn't exist. We found that that was a good model that encouraged best practices so that people were comfortable coming in, that the women didn't lose their main source of support. And but just recently we were told we couldn't do it because that was some tacit approval of home birth. And we said, well, we do approve of home birth, done properly and with the right standards and the right backup. It's a good option. So that's, a battle that's still being fought. Certainly at FNS we did home births, and I had done home births, of course, and still do on occasion. And of course in Guatemala there are a lot of home births as well. Well, I came to the work in Guatemala entirely by chance. I attended a conference in Oaxaca, Mexico, which was midwives from all over the Americas. And meanwhile in Guatemala, this very brave group of Maya women had decided that they needed to do something because they said all of these well-intentioned international groups would come and try to teach them to improve their skills, and they heartily participated. What they told us was that basically they would get these classes. They had had so many classes on hemorrhage and newborn resuscitation that they could teach the classes. And they later demonstrated that to be true. They knew the theory. But they'd say, we would attend all the courses, we'd do all the things. Lots of money would be spent. Not for us. We didn't see any of that money. We were the coffee makers and the translators and so forth. But at the end of the day, the vans would pull away. A lot of money would be spent, and we would be standing there with a piece of string and a razor blade. And then they would say these stupid midwives don't know what they're doing, and they're hopeless. Let's get rid of them all. The wonderful thing about coming to this work, we ended up taking them out to dinner. The water wasn't running in their room, and we ended up letting them come and take showers in our room and spending some time. And I just casually said, oh, I'd love to come down sometime and see what you're doing and maybe how we could be of assistance. And they said, you're coming now. And my friend Mary Ellen, another midwife from Cambridge, who was with me, we had an extra week where we were going to go to the beach. After the conference, we said, scrap the beach, So we climbed in the back of a pickup truck and we're off for this wild ride to Guatemala. And suddenly not suddenly, but after many, many hours of hurtling through space in the back of a pickup, we were like surrounded by volcanoes and we were just in this beautiful place, and we were put given a bed to share with two of the children of the house, of the midwife's house, and began to really hear what they needed. So it was always their agenda, not ours. And that's been sort of the hallmark of what we've tried to keep it. So they started out saying we need equipment. There's no way to communicate with each other. We can't call for help or advice. We can't transport people. We have no medicines other than our plant medicines. And people get very upset if we use them. And there was this huge list of why they couldn't put knowledge into practice. And then to be turned around and blamed for the bad outcomes. So we tried to simultaneously address all of those things, like this revolutionary idea that they ought to be paid for their work and be able to live and devote themselves to their profession. But it started out slow with, we can get you some blood pressure cuffs. And then it went to, we need a place to meet. There are 40 of us. And we can help find some money to rent a place for you to meet. And we need a place for the women to give birth, because when a woman comes in labor, we have to wake her children and they sleep on the floor so the woman can have a bed. So we thought, maybe, a little room. So it turned into doing a big fundraiser and raising the money to build a whole birth center and clinic that has 5 birthing rooms, and it has a small clinic. It has a huge community and teaching space, apartment for visitors. They wanted to incorporate their traditional medicine, so there's a sweat lodge that features predominantly in postpartum care, which, by the way, is better than postpartum care that people receive here. It's primo postpartum care, a place to plant their herbs, but they wanted a pharmacy as well. So it was this real effort to meld the best of both worlds that has worked out very well, and has also been a good argument for how you reduce costs. It's evolved then from this struggling group of midwives who wanted the same thing I wanted when I got started, which was control over their profession. Don't all midwives here in this country want that? We still don't have that here. And it's a big concern of mine, because as we are being forced to practice more and more like obstetricians, our outcomes begin to look every bit as dismal as theirs. And it's because they have the final word. And if they say to do something that it is unnecessary or dangerous, then we're insubordinate if we don't do it. And so until we have control of our own profession, we are going to have these problems in our outcomes looking worse and worse, not better and better. And that's what the midwives there were up against, so that kind of resonated with me, and I think with every midwife who meets them and finds what they're capable of. Once again, formed on personal relationships and long-term commitments, understanding how they learn. They decided to have an apprentice program, for instance, in their own Maya language. And so we said, great, what's your curriculum going to be? I didn't hand them I.C.N.M standards. That's in the future, that level. But the important thing was that they own this, that it become theirs, because that's the thing that had never ever been allowed them to say, to use their own creativity, their own knowledge, and to continuously increase it, but to be able to do it. So we said, okay, where's your program? Well, they came back with this, a year's worth of coursework and a year of apprenticeship at our little birth center. And because they were getting a salary, they could send their kids to school and high school, so their children were literate, could do, so we introduced computers and other wise uses of technology, cell phones for the communication issues. We fundraised and got a van. We did partnered with a lot of groups, all volunteer, and it was basically done by, and this continues to be done by 5 people. But now we're branching out, getting recognition from both the medical community, the mayor of the town. The head of this group of midwives is now on the Presidential Committee for the Rights of Women in Guatemala, with her 3rd grade education, being a Maya voice there. The hope, of course, is that we can demonstrate that Indigenous midwives are not a lost cause. The approach has not been appropriate, and they are the people who are going to be where you need them, speak the languages, be cost effective, all of these things. So it is worth changing your approach to allow them to become what they can become and be the leaders in their own communities. And the midwives in Guatemala talk about how awful it is to always be the recipient of charity. And as grateful as they are for it, and they are grateful. And I saw that in Kentucky. I've seen that in the inner city of how do you find the way to bring these women and lift all women thereby to do this work. That's why we said that, the birth center belongs to them. We have no control over that. We help them with operating costs, but we don't micromanage that, because over and over again you're just humbled because you think, oh, this is what you need to do, but in that context it isn't, and they know better in most instances. The fact that happens then makes it easier for them to accept your thoughts and what you have to offer, and to see that as valuable rather than oppressive. I mean, this tendency to call people TBAs, I think, who gave you, are you the queen of the universe to waltz into someone else's country and demote midwives to the silly acronym? There is at this level, unintentional, because I know everybody who's working in this field is wholeheartedly working for good. But I think that we all are often, and myself included, caught up by that sort of underlying we're in charge, And it's hard to talk about it in midwifery, particularly with people who've been working a long time in global health, because it comes out critical, and that is not the intent. It's sort of, how do we find that humility to say, we went at this with our best intentions, but we need to now listen more, and that's the heart of midwifery, is listening to each other and to the people we serve. That's it. It's the trust and to stick with it for the long run, like that American tendency to want the quick fix and the soundbite answer doesn't give you very good results. So it's, okay, we're doing this. Oh, that didn't work? Okay, we're doing that. And to shift and to be willing to just pool your creativity, and it means trust. It means that you have to have that foundation with these women, the sweat lodge is a great equalizer, because that's how you take a bath there. It's also used for healing and ritual purposes, but it's also how you take a bath. So where the good stuff happens, I find, is in the sweat lodge. You're all naked. You're scrubbing each other's backs. You're hearing about their problems with their child or their husband or what have you. At night, when there aren't births, people will be weaving or embroidering, and I'll be knitting, and you hear people's stories, and that's what sees you through and gives you the confidence to solve the problems, and it becomes fun. It just becomes, okay, what are we going to do? And it's exciting, and it's your creativity starts jumping in with new solutions, because there is that foundation of affection and trust and listening. Midwives are so exhausted, and it's because we are so attentive to the women we serve, and we have often little mercy for our colleagues. And I've thought about this a lot, and looking at the history of nursing and of midwifery. It was done by the lower levels of society at first. Then the nursing religious orders came in. So it became poverty, chastity, and obedience. It became, on one hand, a very noble instinct of being willing to sacrifice, which can often tip over into needless martyrdom. I see that as such a thread in midwifery, so that if you aren't exhausted and miserable, if your personal relationships aren't in shambles, you aren't doing enough, and people proudly tell of, and I work 28 hours without sleep and no food, and you say, well, that shouldn't happen, should it? We've made ourselves available to do that, and people who control us in some respects say, oh, okay, knock yourself out. And we do, and we knock out our clinicians. So I think the average lifetime of a midwife in clinical practice is something around 5 years, because it's exhausting, and we don't nourish each other enough and give attention to our work environments and the incredible time commitments that are expected. The electronic record, with all of its promise for good, currently is really adversely affecting, in my opinion, outcomes in the acute care setting, because it was designed for the sort of situation where you have someone coming in, you have one person. It's not designed for if in a hospital where you might have 5 people in labor and several in triage and people over in postpartum, and this incredible level of documentation and being a billing specialist and data entry clerk, and ridiculous things. For instance, in our hospital, as part of the admission, we have to screen healthy women in labor for their risk of bed sores, developing bed sores during their hospital stay. And it's this 2-page thing, and you have to do it. And meanwhile, she is needing your support in labor, and you're asking about this. So that's just one small example, but I think that midwives are going to have to take on making the electronic record work as it could work and really be a help, and not have it be generating a lot of useless or bad or downright untrue data, and taking your time away from what you're supposed to be doing. I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen, but I'm saying that, for instance, in our birth center, it's made it impossible for some midwives to continue working, because they have these standards that get applied across the board of taking blood pressures every 5 minutes and recording them in real time. Well, if you're with a woman in active labor and you're the only person there, and it's going to be a water birth, and you're in these, $35 get-up things, long gloves, and you have to be stopping and typing this in, and then you can't get to the data when you need it because you have to log in and go through all this rigmarole when something very acute may be happening. This is what is causing midwives in our area to tear their hair out. And it needs to be addressed, but you're working your 60 or 80-hour week already. So there are many things that it does make easier, and the data collection and the ability. But a lot of the data, because of the smart sets, where you just press a button and it populates the whole physical, well, I kind of paid some attention to that, and people were charting that they were doing these ophthalmic exams in labor, which are very hard to do if you've got someone squirming around in labor. But the ophthalmoscope had been broken on the unit for over 6 months, wasn't working. And yet people would punch that button and populate all this stuff, said you did it, you didn't. So there's that happening. So there are a lot of issues that midwives are going to have to speak up about because it affects the direct care, because it's the amount of time required to attend to the machine is now much more than the time that is allotted to being with the woman. Yes, because I'm free to be a midwife there, and I'm free to, again, to solve problems, because these solutions are there, and people know what the solutions are. It's not a mystery. We're just not permitted to do it. And that's, again, that notion of autonomy and having our own profession that has its own standards and its own responsibilities, and the outcomes will determine whether it's good or not. Taking that responsibility as well. So then we can show something. Then the data will show that what our work is the best approach. I think that, in getting the birth center started, we found ways of working politically. We had to engage the support of the city council. This was a city hospital, so there were much more powerful groups vying for this beautiful Victorian house that we wanted for the birth center. So our strategy was to invite all the female members of the city council for a tea party around election time. And it started out sort of as your classic tea party at election time. But we got the women talking about their births. And so by the end of the tea party, we had people weeping as they recalled the traumas they'd suffered. And one of the council members at the time was gay, and the humiliating and painful things that she and her partner had gone through to find a provider when they were having a baby. And next thing we knew, they were making it part of their campaign literature. And so there are ways of working around it, but the ability to exploit midwives by other groups to exhaust us, use us up, take credit for what we've done, all those issues are the things I see as the biggest challenges that drive women out of the profession, and that keep us from realizing our full potential to give top-notch health care. I love my work. I hope always to work. So it's always just been being able to find that oasis where I can actually, make my contribution. But I've been blessed with wonderful friends. I have, a wonderful son and 4 grandchildren, and Vermont, and music, dancing, the things that bring me back on point when I start to drag a little bit. Still horses, yes. Yeah, now all my granddaughters are riding, so that's been a great joy. Where a woman nearly died was a very sobering one. There was a happy ending to it, but it really made me understand that the responsibility that you have is so profound. I mean, you do have life and death in your hands, and that has to ever be present. That as we talk about the quality of the experience and the fine points, that's resting on your shoulders at all times, and keeping you honest in terms of keeping up to date and being always vigilant. I think the high points were starting the service in Jamaica Plain and being part of that whole group of women who made midwifery happen again in Massachusetts. That was an accomplishment I'm very proud of. And being a founder of the birth center, because that's made such an immense difference, and it's a multicultural center. So it was all the things I love, the love of language and culture, and that the idea makes me patriotic. It's sort of the melting pot, and making difference be something wonderful, not something divisive. It's very wonderful to have a birth center that was welcoming people from all over the world and speaking many languages and working with this wonderful group of women. And then working in Guatemala has just been a whole new education, a whole new level of learning about how the world works and what you can contribute. So those would be the three things I think that are most important. So I've been very fortunate in having landed in those places, I think. So.